next guest is, I'm very much looking forward to hearing from. Kate Swaffer started her professional career as a nurse, specialising in dementia and aged care, and then in operating theatres. After nursing, she worked for 10 years as a chef, and then in the healthcare sales area. She now works as an advocate for dementia and aged care. She is the first chair of Alzheimer's Australia Dementia Advisory Committee. Kate's going to tell us about her own experience around her own diagnosis with younger onset dementia and her journey since. Please welcome Kate Swaffer.
Thank you very much, Paul. And thank you, Faisal, for inviting me to speak today. It's a very special conference. I'd have to say, Paul, when you introduced Faisal, it's probably the understatement of the century. He has an interest in dementia. I think it's a bit more than that, Faisal, and I know for one I can't thank you enough for the passion and the love that you bring to caring for people with dementia and their families. So for me, my story is personal. I have a diagnosis of dementia, but today it is actually my 16th wedding anniversary, and so I thought I'd put this screen up. Family through. My husband Peter was going to be here today. He apologises. He's got work commitments that couldn't be avoided, and then we've also got an auntie who's flown over today for some treatment at Wakefield Street, so I think he's running around picking her up. We're a small Brady bunch. We met through our children who were 4 and 5 when we met them. In fact, we didn't like each other when we met each other. And they turned 24 and 25 this year. I was born in a small country hospital in a farming community on the Eyre Peninsula, and after finishing nursing and then chefing, I worked in healthcare sales. So in 2008, I was working full-time, studying a double degree at the University of South Australia, caring for school-aged children, running a home with my husband, and volunteering. And my life was interesting, busy, and very fulfilling. Then aged 49, I was diagnosed with a frontotemporal dementia. It is a debilitating terminal illness. I've also been a family carer for people with dementia. My father-in-law died with Lewy body dementia 2 years ago, and a young friend died May of last year with vascular dementia. And he too had to live in aged care because there is nowhere else in South Australia for someone aged 55 to enter aged care that I know of. Just a little bit about my diagnosis that people might find helpful. I came from a reasonably high intellectual base, which was not meant to sound egotistical, but just to put things in perspective. When I discovered the signs of dyslexia and memory loss, more than what I knew to be normal for my age, and significant challenges in my ability to process simple information, like using a calculator, I started to think something was wrong. In fact, these things, in retrospect, started back in my very early 40s when I was getting colours and numbers back to front. In 2006, I started spelling really simple words like that incorrectly, becoming confused about how to use the words there, and then other simple word mistakes. I've been exceptional at language, and I was the one at work always checking the quotes or writing the letters to clients, and all of a sudden I was needing to be checked. So when I was sent for my first MRI, I was not even insightful enough to realise I was being checked for Alzheimer's. Ironically, I worked in the first dedicated dementia unit in South Australia in 1977, which is a long time ago, and like Maggie said, she was too soft for nursing. I was way too soft for aged care and ended up half the time in tears at night. So I went off into operating theatres, which was a different type of nursing, but I didn't get so emotionally involved. But I should have had insight that I was actually being checked for dementia. And that was actually an alert to my neurologist because he too was very concerned that I hadn't realised that's what I was being checked for. Anyway, I was first formally checked in 2007, and then after further decline, further humiliating and invasive tests, the diagnosis was made, followed up with a second neurologist interstate who reconfirmed it. I was reading some research only this week that says between, I think, 15 and 25% of people who have been diagnosed formally with dementia on brain autopsy, they find that something else has caused the symptoms of dementia, and it's not dementia. Well, I'm not quite ready for the autopsy. My husband talks about dementia as being a threesome, sort of like having a third person in the house. It's one I've likened to the Three Stooges, not always as much fun. But he talks about how the three of us coexist, about how it's not an ideal situation, as most people know that two's company and three's a crowd. He said last year, it's important to remember that the person he loves is not causing the changes, it's the dementia. And it's not my fault that I have dementia. But he's not particularly fond of our new lodger. I've been nicknamed that one in the middle, by the way, whose name I can't remember. But our life has changed in ways that are challenging to understand and sometimes difficult to live with. And so I urge you all to live every day as if it's your last, just in case it is. And as I've heard at other conferences, to live with urgency before the emergency. My willingness to speak out is fueled by the fact that much of our care feels symptom-based, and I believe that nothing will change until we recognise it is imperative we all understand the human cost of dementia. And I guess having a Dignity in Dementia Care conference on Valentine's Day really does take it to a new level of humanity. The other reason I speak out is the only way that you can understand what it's like to be a person with dementia is to walk in my shoes. And if I don't invite you into my world, then how can I reasonably expect you to know what it's like? Since being diagnosed with dementia, I've been told I can't possibly have it because I can still speak, or that I'm lying for notoriety. I've been told once after a presentation by a very well-meaning registered nurse, and she sat me down in a quiet corner, very concerned, and she said, "You know that no matter how much you fight against it, it's going to get you in the end." I've also been told, "But you look and sound intelligent still." And so I guess it is important to break down the stereotypes of people with dementia. I feel quite lucky in a way that I was diagnosed more early, and I've had therefore more capacity to fight against the symptoms. But it's also a reason why many may doubt I have dementia. It seems incredulous to me that I constantly need to justify the diagnosis, and that living with it well is not seen as more positive. If I'd sustained a brain injury, or I had a car accident, or a stroke, and was doing well with rehab, my success would be applauded and explored rather than the extent of my injury questioned. I also speak out because there's a gross underrepresentation of people with dementia deciding on our care and our futures. And all around the world, people with dementia, I guess in Maggie's words, are going viral, or John Stewart's, that we are speaking out as a global united group of people, because there should be nothing about us without us. The changes brought on by, The changes brought on by dementia are relentless, and yet most people don't yet see them as disabilities, but as symptoms. Many also think it's a mental illness, which it's not. Dementia is taken from Latin, originally meaning madness. In fact, when I Googled the word just last week, the thing that struck me there was the synonyms: mental illness, madness, insanity, derangement, lunacy, senile dementia. So that was the first site that I Googled. So no wonder we struggle against the myths. But we are often and regularly defined by the symptoms of our disease. In case notes or in speaking, we're called forgetful, confused, aggressive, odd behaviour, absconders, refusing to communicate, rather than the people that we still are. Mothers, fathers, lovers, daughters, wives or husbands, even employees or employers for younger people with dementia. It's a tragedy that even now, so many people just see the deficits. I know that the hard drive that I had is slowly evaporating. The lapses of memory loss are intermittent, sometimes short-term, sometimes long-term, but they are happening more often. My language difficulties are getting more difficult. On the good days, I'm tempted into believing nothing is wrong, when it seems it is just memory loss for my age. But the multitasking I was so good at, as most nurses are, and doctors, has gone, and sometimes I can barely cope with one function, getting distracted partway through, then forgetting what I've been doing. Not once a week, but many, many times a day now. And as these things worsen, I'm often confronted with what I've termed the sour lemon look, by people who are young enough or well enough to still feel invincible. So few have tolerance for human incapacity. Watching that swan that John Stewart from Alzheimer's Australia, watching that video was actually quite confronting for me, because I've been lost in Rundle Wall. To see me today, you wouldn't believe that. I've been lost on a bus as well. But for me and for many others, it is like being a swan, calm and serene on the surface, paddling below to stay afloat. Occasionally people say to me, well, what's it really like having dementia? I say, it's a bit more like being a bloke. Only do one thing at once, and then sorry guys. Instead of me telling the kids to have a boy look, a girl look, they now tell me to have a girl look. And that's true. So our relationships change, especially with those very close. My children mostly act as if nothing was wrong. Our youngest son was in year 12 when I was diagnosed, and I suspect it did have a bit of an impact on his overall result that year. But our way of coping is to use humour and love. And in those early days of diagnosis, they used to introduce me to their friends as the Dementor in the family, as in the Harry Potter book, Dementor. And it sounds a bit funny, but for any of you that have seen the movies, I can't remember which one, but that visual representation of the Dementor sucking out Harry's soul, it actually feels just like that. So people with dementia love deeply. They still love deeply. They had happy times with families. My family would probably be horrified to see I'll put these slides up. But it is Valentine's Day, and that is our wedding photo, and that is our family. Pete's mum and dad, the couple with the sunglasses on, have passed away since then. And that's our lovely boys. They were 7 and 8 at that stage. But if you're looking after people with dementia, it might help to have a look at their wedding photos, because it'll really remind you that they do love, they did love, they do have happy times. My husband lives with an ever-deepening sorrow as he watches from the sidelines. He tries to support me without minimising me. In fact, I call him my bub, my backup brain. Constantly tries to hide or block out his grief as we strive to live the best way we can. But some days I see the intense sadness in his eyes, or I can feel it in his hugs, or see it in the way he sometimes sits and holds his head in his hands, or stares at me when he thinks I'm not looking. We email each other a lot because I can then go back to our conversations. And he wrote to me in an email, I know I'm losing you, and I'm afraid of what the future holds. said when we told him, or both the boys, I had dementia, "But Mum, isn't that a funny old person's disease?" And although we laughed, it's not actually that funny. It often seems to me that dementia care is caring for people who don't know they need care. They don't want to be in care, and so no wonder they may become a bit angry or upset. But as Faisal is proving, and with the massive networking of dignity and care champions in South Australia and around the world, it doesn't have to be the case. For people with younger onset dementia, we're prescribed upon diagnosis what I call prescribed disengagement. After my diagnosis, I was told to give up work, to give up tertiary study, and to go home and live for the time I had left, whatever that meant after I'd given up everything. And I did turn this, and this term's gone a bit viral just lately as well. And it's at odds with what I considered living. Why at 49 would I want to give up everything? So back then, the medical team and service providers all advocated this disengagement, which supports, in my opinion, social inequality, stigma and discrimination and isolation. This prescribed disengagement from pre-diagnosis life supports and exacerbates ignorance, social, and I think I've repeated myself, sorry, isolation, fear, discrimination, and dementia is the only disease I've ever heard of where you're told to give up. If you're diagnosed with cancer, you're told to fight. If you're diagnosed with any other disease, you're told to fight. Why are we told to give up? So when I lost my driver's licence age 50, a year after diagnosis, because I was in healthcare sales, I did have to give up work. And if I had become sight impaired, my employer would have been legally obliged to find me other ways to function in that working environment. Instead, I was told to go home. Luckily, I ignored the neuropsych's advice of giving up university. And at university, they work on the disability model of care, where they suggest rehabilitation and remaining engaged in pre-diagnosis lives. I was referred by lecturers to the disability advisor and set up with a disability access plan, active for the continuation and completion of my studies, not for my demise. This access plan evolved as the symptoms demanded, changing in the same way it would if I hadn't acquired brain injury or a disease like MS where symptoms are regularly changing. At uni, I was treated as a whole person with support for my disabilities rather than advised to disengage and give up. Post-diagnosis, I completed a Bachelor of Arts in Professional Writing and then a Bachelor of Psychology, which demonstrates to me that treating the symptoms of dementia as disabilities to be dealt with rather than managing them as in ways that restrict and hinder me were vital to my general well-being, my motivation, my sense of meaningful engagement and real achievement. The other significant study for me was it's a method of neuroplasticity brain training. If I had been referred to a brain injury unit, I would have been proactively treated to live the very best life possible with the injury or disease that I had. So suggesting I disengaged from a meaningful life was not only illogical, but I thought it was insulting. And I think that the Bunnings Life Care Project has proven that people could stay engaged at work if their employers accommodated their symptoms. So this one's a very, very busy slide. It looks like a researcher's slide actually. But it's just listing the difference in what I call the disability model of continued engagement versus the medical model of prescribed disengagement. So I tried to outline and compare my experience between health providers and the university. And the university or disability model maintained meaningful engagement, which supported fully embracing love, life, loss and dementia with zest and positivity, ensuring that today, my wedding anniversary, is spent with joy rather than just in tears. These are a list of non-pharmacological interventions I use for managing the symptoms and progression of dementia. Some of those I use every day, some more than every day. I've taken to writing madly, and writing poetry in particular seems to be just coming out of my pores. And I thought I'd read a poem as I was listening to, I can't remember who earlier on, I think it was John talking about the stigma of dementia. I thought I'd read this poem to you. It's called My Unseen Disappearing World. Days alone with dementia, laughter and love, tragedy and sadness, memory loss, playing cards alone, grief, tears, shock, humiliation and stigma, dancing, daring, engagement and inspiration, hysterical and life-changing moments lost in time. So that's my book that was published in 2012, and I've got 2 more about to head to the publishers. These are the positive psychosocial interventions that I use as well, and advocacy has been a huge one for me, especially having given up work. Whenever you go to an event or a conference, people say to you, if they haven't met you before, "Oh, hi, my name's Kate, what do you do?" You don't do anything. It puts you in a very vulnerable position. So some of these have worked for me. I also use volunteering a lot. I volunteer for the homeless, and when Michael and Dad were alive, I used to volunteer in the nursing home. In fact, I used to help run a coffee shop for one of the nursing homes, and my other volunteers were all over 70, and they used to laugh about this young thing coming in to volunteer. And to start with, I had to wear L plates because I couldn't manage the bloody coffee machine. Oh, have you ever tried to froth that milk up and then have 50, 75 plus year olds say, "Oh, I don't like it like that, dear." So after a few weeks they voted, and I was allowed to wear P plates, so I went up the ranks, and eventually there was a vote taken and my P plates were taken off. But one of the days I was there, somebody said to me, "So really, this is the demented, looking after the demented. We haven't got any hope, have we?" But in fact, volunteering has been wonderful for me because it takes me away from myself. I've got friends who are homeless who I've been to visit underneath the Morford Street Bridge. Now, I can't imagine being there today. And I couldn't imagine having been there yesterday when it was 43, or the day before, when it was 43 degrees. So if I have a bad day, all I have to really do is think about some of those people that I know and love now. Some of them, it took them 3 or 4 years for them to actually accept a hug. They have so little human contact. And I'm really glad that Alzheimer's Australia SA is working in the homeless sector now with dementia. I've tried really hard to stay meaningfully, positively engaged. In 2012, I did a Adelaide Fringe performance, or 4 of them, called My Unseen Disappearing World. It was a random idea. I have no idea why I did it. I'll definitely never do it again. On the first night that I was performing, the Fringe bus was wandering around the streets, and I don't know if any of you've been on the Fringe bus, but there's someone there with a microphone. And it really was like the venue where I was holding and had dementia, because every 4th sentence, the microphone, the lady from the Fringe bus would take over my presentation. It was actually quite funny, but on the fourth night of that presentation, I started to understand the toll that it had taken on my two children and husband, who were really my production team for those events. But the youngest one, most of his friends came on that last night, probably 50 or 60 people under 20, and a lot of those young kids Facebook friended me afterwards, and I had the most amazing messages. So if you set out to do something and you have a tick box of things you wanted to achieve, these were the extra things that I didn't anticipate. Some of my son's friends who were studying nursing have now gone into aged care, further education and working, and then others sent me these lovely Facebook messages saying, I had no idea what my nan was going through. I'm going to try and be a better grandson. So you can get out in the community and do things that are really meaningful, and sometimes you don't even know the impact of them. Domiciliary Care produced a video called Understanding Dementia, which they use for staff training now. I was patron to a play put on by Urban Myth Theatre Group about younger onset dementia, which vaguely represented my story, but I think that in the end the writer might have been on speed while he was finishing it off. But it was still a really good production, and Urban Myth put on 2 productions over a couple of years that really raised the profile and raised awareness of dementia. I'm still on a number of Alzheimer's Australia national and state committees, some of them with Faisal, so he definitely keeps us in check. I'm involved in the University of Tasmania's, I've forgotten what MOOC stands for, some of you out there will know, Understanding Dementia course. I'm part of the New South Wales Department of Health e-learning course, and my blog has been archived by the state and national libraries in the Pandora collection and is an academic resource around the world, which I'm very proud of. Just recently I was elected as an Alzheimer's Australia Dementia Advisory Group Chair, and I initiated that group, the 3rd of its kind in the world in Australia, and I've also just been helped set up Dementia Alliance International, which is a group of by and for people with dementia. So today, in some small way, I hope I might have helped you walk in the shoes of somebody living with dementia. I'm staying positive. I use lots of little tricks to stay positive. If you're having a miserable day or a miserable moment, all you need to do is pick up your pen and hold it between your teeth, and it'll definitely make you smile. Give it a go. So I'm a person living with dementia, but with the emphasis on living. Thank you very much for listening.